Trevor introduced me earlier. My name is Hrnicek. I'm the Director of Sales here at NutraDrip and helping lead the agronomy charge as well. I've been on the NutraDrip team for about 2 years now, and really excited to be here. Glad it rained, so that way some of y'all can make it in here today. And yeah, we'll get rolling here kind of on just irrigation and nutrient management and how those two are correlated and related. And then talk about some of the sampling techniques and processes that we do to collect and measure information, and then how it is that we manage that information and how we address some of those challenges that pop up. So a little about me. This is my crew here, my wife, and we've got 5 kiddos, and then I've got a younger brother, an autistic brother who lives with us as well. So this is the reason I get up every day, and then the why is, whoops, it didn't show up, but there's a crazy picture in the background there of my family being goofballs. So that's kind of my why. Like most people in the room, I have a Wheat Husker Red. Right? I was born and raised in the Seward area. I live in Colby, Kansas now. I went to Purdue University for school there, was an ag econ major, worked in the seed industry for about 10 years, about half that time with Monsanto, half that time with Dow Sciences. That was over in Indiana. From there, I transitioned into the animal nutrition industry, so started consulting with dairies, worked all over the United States doing that. Had the fortune of working in about 36 different states while doing that, and basically what I was doing was working with dairies and feedlots and the growers that would grow for them to help develop the most nutrient-dense feed stuff that we possibly could, right? So trying to maximize how much the grower gets paid and trying to maximize the return on that feed from a dairy or feedlot perspective. So we've traveled around quite a bit. We actually traveled, my wife and kids and I, we traveled full-time for a couple years while we did that, and then we landed in Northwest Kansas and jumped on board with the NutraDrip team. So the first thing I want to talk about today is kind of some satellite monitoring. How many in here are using imagery on their farm in some way, shape, form, or another? How many have imagery and are not really using imagery on their farm, some way, shape, form, or another, right? So what are the challenges that you see with imagery right now on some of the platforms that you're using? What makes it difficult to use?
Clouds. Yeah.
Clouds? That's certainly one of it. How about the frequency of the imagery? Right? I mean, clouds plays into that, but even just the frequency of actually getting images, right? On a lot of these platforms, we're getting imagery maybe every 7 days, and then all of a sudden if we get cloud cover or Canadian smoke cover or wildfire cover, then it's 14 days or 21 days. And so as far as being able to use that imagery and say we can do something in season, it gets to be really challenging, right? Maybe there's times at the end of the season, once we look at yield maps and we say, when did that start to show up in the field? We can maybe go back and look at some of that imagery. But as far as saying I can do something actually in season, it's pretty difficult. The fun thing is this platform here, the EarWatch platform, it really starts to change the dynamics of that. So this is a thermal satellite platform. They actually have their own satellites in space, and we get almost near daily coverage with these satellites. So being that it's thermal, clouds still matter, but they matter a lot less. We can cut through much more cloud cover with the thermal bands than what we have the ability to without. So in the background here, you can see this is a farm that we do some monitoring on. We've got 2 different pivots here, and then they've got 2 drip fields. And as you can see, maybe a little hard to see, but you can see these white boundary lines. So on the drip side of things, we'll create an outer border for the entire drip field, and then we'll create borders within each zone as well. That way you can actually manage it all the way down to a zone level. So if for some reason something's not operating correctly, if a valve sticks on, a valve sticks closed, rather than saying, oh, I found out about it after my corn looked really, really bad, or my beans looked really, really bad, we can identify that very, very rapidly using the technology. And then same thing even on the pivots, are we watering at the right speed? Are we keeping crop stress, at a manageable level? This map here, what I've got pulled up from a layer here, this is a soil temp map taken from this morning. Or I should say taken from yesterday, reported this morning. on this farm, and I don't have the legend included here, but the soil temps on this particular farm range from about 52 to 59 degrees. And so, as you think about planting even on your own operation, right, as we think about where our soil temps, does that ever impact, or should it potentially impact, when and where we're putting seed across our farm? So let's talk a little bit about some of the layers that are available with this imagery. So from an imagery layer perspective, you've got soil temperature, you've got soil moisture gradient and data, you have crop growth, so that would be the biomass growth of your crop that's out there, and that's available both on a daily basis, so how much biomass has accumulated since the last image was taken, and then also we plug in your planting date, and it will tell you the accumulated biomass since the beginning of the season. So there's two different layers there on the biomass side. You do have your standard kind of NDVI imagery that a lot of us are accustomed to. And then this one is one that really gets me excited, is this evapotranspiration. So we get a measurement of the ET of that crop, right? So, of course, earlier in the year when we typically aren't as hot, that ET is a little lower, but then as we ramp up and as that crop is in a more advanced stage and as the heat ensues, we see that ET ramp up. And so this gives us the ability to not only say, hey, we're irrigating, right? But not only are we irrigating, but are we actually meeting the demand of the crop? Are we actually meeting ET? Now, in some cases, not so much here in central Nebraska where you guys have bigger water, but in some other places where we work, we actually can't meet the daily ET of the crop because we don't have big enough wells or enough available water, so we have to kind of forecast and plan that all of a sudden, hey, if our ET is maybe 0.3 inches, we have systems, but you just literally can't provide that much water in a day. So we have to do some forecasting, some building of the profile, things like that, or adjusting pivot speeds, things like that to try to really maximize the return on that. They've also got some leaf nitrogen, a leaf nitrogen layer that's still kind of in the beta form. I'm really excited to plug in with that more heavily this year as we just think about nitrogen management. How do we do that more effectively? I think imagery certainly is a part of that. There's already some active platforms out there that maybe some of you are using for that. But at the end of the day, when you take all this imagery and data and information and combine it, what it really helps you do is it helps you make daily decisions from an irrigation perspective, from a fertigation perspective. It's another layer that adds confidence into the farm plan that you have, right? It allows you to take out some of the guesswork of what it is we are doing. Are we doing the right thing? Are we not doing the right thing? Are we doing to adjust or adjust that dial on our program? And this gives you the confidence to be able to do that. So, a few layers here. So this is 3 consecutive days of imagery. And this is the soil moisture layer. So on this pivot here, you can see we went from pretty good, starting to show some stress, showing some major stress on 3 consecutive days. Again, you wouldn't see that on a weekly image, right? You would see where it was versus where it was, and maybe by that time the pivots come back around and you go, hey, I'm pretty good, right? Sure, but again, should we be altering our watering management? Should we be altering how fast that pivot's running or drip, etc.? The images down below here, this is crop ET, so this would be your daily measurement, again, of what that evapotranspiration rate is. How much is that crop emitting, transpiring out of the canopy? Here we're more intense, starts to lessen. So I just wanted to show those, again, just as a little bit of an example of, hey, this platform's pretty neat. It's got a lot of capabilities, a lot of functionality to it. Now, as a grower, as farmers in the room, I'm sure most of you have lots of time where you wish you had something to do, right? We just sit around and twiddle our thumbs and say, I wish I had something to do today during irrigation season, right? And we look at platforms and we go, oh man, this is something else I have to log into and figure out how to interpret images and figure out how do I utilize this on my farm. As a grower who's enrolled in this, you have full access to the platform and you can log in and you can see all that information. But what we've done internally is we've API'd into that information as well, and we will actually send out messages similar to this, to the grower, to the landowner, whomever needs to be involved, that basically, again, from this perspective, we can look at soil moisture, we can look at irrigation recommendations, soil temp, ET, vegetation, what the forecast is, what the trends are on leaf nitrogen, NDVI. We can format that a few different ways based on the layers that are most applicable to your farm. And so that message is something, for your fields that you can get on a daily basis. So that way, rather than logging into a platform and having to dissect and understand what all the images are telling you, you can see that first thing in the morning and say, everything's going really well, or hey, here's a spot that maybe I need to pay some attention to here real quick. Does that make sense to everybody? And I know everybody likes to get more and more notifications on their phone at all times, right? But I think this is a pretty good one. So again, I don't want to spend much time on that. I do want to say, hey, we're just doing a quick little introductory thing for anybody who might be interested in this. So what we're going to do here is we're going to offer 15% off on your first 120 acres on this platform. So that would actually bring your price to about $3.83 an acre. The normal onboarding price is $4.50 an acre for the platform. We're going to keep that offer open here for the next couple weeks. And what we need is we just need your field name, your planting date. Obviously you don't have that yet, but we'll work with you on that. What crop you're going to plant, and then we just want a commitment that at the end of the season, you're going to be willing to just share some yield data with us. So that way as we correlate all these images, things like that, we can say, how did this overlay with your yield imagery? So it's really simple. All you have to do to enroll is reach out to Trevor, Pierre, Trent, Greg, and say, hey, I'm interested in that satellite imagery thing, and we can get you enrolled. The other thing is, if we're busy and all those things, and let's say we get to June 20th and you're like, oh yeah, I'm turning maybe we get some rain, and oh yeah, now I'm turning irrigation on, I want that. We can still turn it on June 20th. We don't have to necessarily have it built in the preseason. The subscription, the normal rate of $4.50 an acre, what that gets you is it actually gets you a 365-day subscription to the platform. So you get to watch all of that in the on-season and during the off-season, if you will. So if you're overwintering cover crops, if you're, grazing cattle out there, or even if you're not, you just want to say, hey, I'm still interested in knowing what's going on in the field during that time, you'll be able to see that for a full 365 days. Make sense? Any questions on the platform here at all? Okay, very good. Well, let's talk about the NutraDrip Agronomy Management System. So it's kind of built on some pillars here. And kind of this first pillar here is this rapid soil test. And we use New Age laboratories. I know some of you did some rapid soil tests last year. We're continuing to do more of that this year. And then we kind of go into as we get that information back, we go into nutrient planning. Really, we've been working with calibrated agronomy, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware. And we start to really focus in on what's the rate of nutrients we're going to use, how are we going to apply those, what's the timing, and then what form of nutrients are we going to apply, which is becoming a bigger and bigger thing as we think about nutrient efficiency and profitability. So we build that plan, and then during the season we go into SAP testing, and we'll talk about this in a little bit of detail as we get going. Come out into your field, verify, validate nutrient uptake, accumulation, mobility, some of those things. Make sure we're trying to operate as close to peak performance as possible, and if not, let's make some in-season adjustments. And then, of course, at the end of the year, everybody's favorite time of year, harvest, right? When we get to reap what we sow, right? We get to collect the fruits of your labor, and we get to collaborate and understand the information and how these pillars poured into that. So let's talk about rapid soil analysis. How many in here do regular soil testing? Most of y'all, okay. What types of soil tests are we running currently?
Grid samples.
Grid samples, okay. Traditional soil testing, Haney, both, some, yeah.
Okay.
A little bit of everything, okay. So rapid soil is not a replacement for those types of base soil samples, okay? What this is this is an additive that is going to help you understand some of the challenges that happen as we start irrigating. So Kurt talked about water quality, and I threw up some stuff here about water quality. So this is a sample, this is something that we're all used to seeing, right, as we've had our wells tested and stuff over the years, right? And we can see some numbers here that pop out. When we look at bicarbonates being really, really high, we've got hard water, calcium, chloride, magnesium, those are all kind of get up there. So these numbers over here on the right side represent, if we're putting on 12 inches a year, we're putting on 1,100 pounds of bicarbs, almost 275 pounds of calcium, 50 pounds of chloride, and 100 pounds of magnesium. And on the surface level, we're like, hey, free fertility, right? This is awesome. But we have to do everything in balance, right? So, standard water quality test is good. It gives us that idea of what we're putting on, and where the rapid soil comes in is it's going to allow us to understand that interaction of the minerals that are coming along with our well water and how that interacts with our soil and what antagonisms that creates. So to do a rapid soil, what we do is we collect a composite sample from the entire field. It's not grid, it's not zone, not traditionally. We have some people that maybe will treat one half of a pivot or part of a drip field differently than the other half. But most of our growers say, hey, we're going to grab a composite from the whole field. So you're grabbing 20 to 30 soil cores from the entire field, and we send that into the lab. Now what the lab's going to do, let me back up. You also grab an irrigation water sample at the same time. So what the lab will do is they're going to subdivide your soil. Okay, you're going to have part A and part B. And with part A, they're going to run deionized water through your soil to simulate rainfall. Okay? And they're going to extract a paste out of there and run a nutrient analysis and say, when it rains, from a soil solution perspective, here is what is available to your crop. Then on part B, they're going to saturate that soil with your irrigation water and say, when you turn your irrigation water on, this is now what's available from a soil solution perspective to your crop. And then we get to identify that and understand what challenges are there. So, some of the questions, that we like to try to answer with this is based on what's available in your soil, based on what's coming in your water, what other nutrients do we need to add to make your farm as profitable as possible, and what levels and what time. Then how do we ensure that the nutrients are going to get into the plant, right? That's a really big thing. We go out, we spend thousands upon thousands of dollars buying mineral nutrition, and we apply it in a variety of ways, which is great, but if we can't get it into the plant, it's really ineffective, right? It doesn't do us a lot of good. So we're going to strategize on how do we get it into the plant, and then how do we just overall account for the impacts of irrigation water. So what are those impacts? Okay, this showed up really small. I apologize for that. This is what the output of a rapid soil analysis looks like. So there's a little yellow banner up here, and what that says is it says deionized water. And we break this down. I don't know why this is so out of focus here, but up here is the anions. So you've got chloride, nitrate, phos, and sulfur. And down here is cations, potassium, magnesium, calcium, sodium, and ammonia. So if we focus on the anions for a minute, sorry, I'm going to read this off just because it's harder to see probably, but chloride comes in at 241 parts per million. Nitrate comes in at about 15 parts per million. Phosphorus is about 12.7, and sulfur is 7. So from the graph, of course, you can see we're in a very chloride-dominant situation, followed by a little bit of nitrate, then some phos. Focus that for me. All right. So it's not necessarily bad that we have a lot of chloride there, right? I mean, it's not. It's winning the war as far as concentration goes, if you will. But as it looks, when it rains, our phosphorus parts per million in that 12.7 range, I'm comfortable with that. We like it to be in that 12 to 15 parts per million range. So, hey, when it rains, we're still able to get phosphorus into the plant. That's acceptable. That's good. When we come over on the right side of the screen here, this is when we turn our irrigation water on. So if we focus on the anions again, our chloride value came down from 240 to 82. Our nitrate went from about 15 up to 25. Sulfur, which was in fourth place, went from 7 up to 18. And phosphorus, which was in third place, went from 12.7 down to 1.26. That kind of screams of a problem, right? We start irrigating and phosphorus becomes very unavailable in soil solution. Well, the reason for that is, if we think back to that water quality sample, and we'll see here as we talk about anions, is we're loading up cations in there that are going to bind that phosphorus up. We're going to make it unavailable. We're going to pull it down and just not allow it to be in soil solution, which isn't a good thing. Furthermore, as this level drops and phosphorus drops down from a ranking perspective with anions, the way a plant works, when a corn plant is trying to take up nutrition, it doesn't say, I'm looking for phosphorus or I'm looking for nitrogen. It is trying to stay in charge balance. So it says, I either need anions or I need cations to stay in a net charge balance. So if the plant is attempting to take up anions, and we have an abundance of chloride, nitrate, and sulfur, but phosphorus is way down there at the bottom of the list, it's not going to be very easy to actually get phosphorus up there, even just from an anion perspective of how that ranks. Does that make sense to everybody? So in this particular water situation, if we also look at the cations, over here on the deionized side, the rainfall simulation, potassium with 172, magnesium 125, calcium 91, sodium at 8, and then ammonia at the bottom there. As we come over to the right side here and apply irrigation water, calcium is 107, so it jumped from third to first place. Magnesium to 48. Potassium dropped all the way from 172 down to 26. Is potassium important? Pretty darn important, right? If we want to grow high-yielding crops, or any yielding crops, potassium is very, very important. Sometimes I think it's overlooked because we don't always see it show up like from a removal rate calculator, but what the plant requires on a daily basis, if we're trying to grow high-yielding corn, it requires a huge amount of phosphorus, or excuse me, a huge amount of potassium during that growing season. So, what's the problem here? Well, the problem, of course, as we talked about, is we turn irrigation water on and we go from having available nutrients to unavailable nutrients. So on that phos, again, we went from 12.7 down to 1.26. We took a reduction of 90% of phosphorus availability when we turned irrigation water on. And on the potassium side of things, 172 down to 26, a reduction of 85% of potassium when we turned irrigation water on. Great news, right? That's just what everybody wanted to hear today is, hey, we're kind of having a dry year, we're going to depend on irrigation water, I'm going to turn it on, and now I can't get nutrition into my plants because I'm turning irrigation water on. Not the rosy story everybody wanted to hear. Now the good news is we've got solutions for that, right? We have ways to overcome this and do it in a very effective and efficient manner. I want to show a couple more examples here before I talk about some of those things. So again, phosphorus, just look at this pie chart. So it's a small percentage here, and when we turn irrigation water on, it actually goes to literally not even visible. And this is something that we see in greater than 95% of the samples that we've taken from a rapid soil perspective, ranging from the Texas Panhandle up through this high plains and into Nebraska and then even over out east. This is something that we see coming from well water regularly, is phosphorus getting out-competed. So then we think about that, when we think about as we go through the growing season and all the energy processes that our crops are going through, we need phosphorus, yet we're suppressing the ability to get it into the crop. So now what? We can't irrigate? Well, of course I'm not going to tell you that, right? We're a drip irrigation company, right? I can't say, let's not irrigate. But what we have to do is we have to find a way to make water the maximum asset we possibly can. So what we do is we take a strategy of addressing water quality at the same time of addressing plant nutrition. They can't necessarily, we don't like them to operate independently of each other because we're trying to be economical about it, right? We're trying to create an opportunity for as much farm profitability as possible. So what we do in a lot of cases is we'll look at a current forecasted crop budget and we'll try to liberate some of the nutrient dollars that are going to be in there. And we'll try to adjust that over to a strategy that's going to address nutrition and water quality at the same time. So one of the ways we do that is with some acid-based fertilizers. So again, look at this color graph here. You can barely see that wedge of phosphorus here. And then when we use a product like a phosphoric-based acid, where we say, hey, we're going to spoon feed that in, every time we run irrigation water, we're going to be spoon feeding in a little bit of phosphoric acid, right? We want to continually get phos into that plant so it's got that charge available, it's got that battery, if you will. Well, this is how we can change the dynamics of what we started with versus where we can go just by putting in a little bit of phos acid per acre. We can make that phosphorus available, we can get it into the plant, and we'll have some other strategies that we employ along with that acid. We might put some complexing agents in there to kind of bring down some of those salts that normally would tie it up and make those temporarily unavailable. But this is a way to ensure we're going to get that into the plant. So how many fertigate in here? A number of y'all, okay? UAN is our primary fertigation tool, right? In most cases, so we're using. Well, let's look at what happens when we do UAN. So well water and adding UAN. Of course, we become very nitrate dominant. That makes sense. Again, look at phosphorus. We cut that phosphorus availability down significantly. So we go to put nitrogen on because that's a good thing. Our crop needs it, but we're suppressing P. What happens if we're overloading, or not overloading, but we're adding nitrate into the system, but we're not bringing phosphorus along? Well, we can't convert that nitrate into amino acids very efficiently, right? We're bloating our plants with nitrate and not allowing for an efficient conversion and an efficient throughput of what we really need that nitrate to do. So another example of this, we can create a very, very good balance using, phosphoric acid is not our only solution, and I'll show some more here in a minute, but we can create a very good balance of bringing nutrition in using different acids, even different acids in combination. So like in this case, here's our well water on the right side, chloride dominant, you've got some nitrate in there, sulfur, phosphorus go way down at the bottom. And when we added acid in here, we're a very, very balanced system here. Nothing outranks anything by real big significance. We've got very available phosphorus in a system that's going to act very harmoniously from a nutrient uptake perspective. So I talked about the anion side, but what about the cation side? Same thing, as we add some of this, the acids that are bringing nitrogen along. Over here, this is what we typically see with well water, is ammonia is pretty much negligible in well water. But as we put in the acids that we're using, you're not only going to bring some nitrate along, you're going to bring some ammonia along, which of course that's even more efficient than nitrate form of nitrogen from a conversion perspective and an efficiency perspective. So again, we just seek to create as much balance as we can so those plants can do their thing and not have nutrient antagonisms. So when we go to our good friends at the co-op and our retailers and things like that, we buy our traditional fertilizers, right? Sometimes we're limited on what we can buy, right? It's like, hey, we have 32, we have thiazole, we got 1034O, we got a handful of products, but we can be a little bit limited. So I just want to throw up, like, here's some standard acid blends that you can get. And a couple of ones that I would say we probably kind of use the most of would be this 26006 and then this 2505. So those are just, again, standard blends, kind of off the shelf, ready to go. But the really fun thing about this as well is, like, if we're analyzing your fertilizer strategy and we're saying, hey, you know what, Yeah, I want to spoon feed all my nitrogen or a significant portion of my nitrogen. We can do that, but I want to bring phos. Okay, that's cool. We can get to that. We want nitrogen, sulfur, phos. But what about if I want potassium in there too? Right? Okay, well, we've got some products that do that, and you can see the concentration starts to change, but we can also just custom make a product specifically for your farm. If we say this is exactly how many pounds we want to apply through fertigation, we can custom build that product and just have it drop shipped right to you as a custom list. So, a lot of flexibility there. Any questions on any of that so far?
So what do you guys worry about that's compatible with putting in your drip system?
Yeah, so from a compatibility with drip, acids work really, really well. So, one of the things that happens with drip sometimes, and not as much necessarily in this geography, but sometimes we'll acidize systems, right? Because of iron and manganese, right? Buildup. Well, as you start to apply acid-based fertilizers, that's actually going to help work on cleaning your system while you're fertilizing, right? Versus some of the salt-based fertilizers, not that they're bad for drip necessarily, because they're not, but they're not necessarily going to help clean the system as well. So from a compatibility, extremely compatible. They've been doing this for 20 plus years down the Texas Panhandle through hundreds of thousands of acres of drip. So, yep.
How do you deliver it? Is it all totes, or do you bring it out?
We could bring, so I prefer to bring it on semi-loads, right? That's the most economical way for a farmer to
We
get
can
it.
bring it out to John's and all these days.
We'll be the hub.
There we go. So something to mention, we don't have it set up yet, but we are gonna have a little bit of fertilizer storage here on site this year. So, understanding that, hey, we're in April, a lot of people have their fertility strategies set, most of their fertility purchased. But if you say, hey, you know what, I'd be willing to consider and look at some of this acid-based strategy from a fertigation perspective this year, we will have some product on site here. We're not going to have a big, we're not like rice. We don't have big, massive storage tanks. We just have little bitty ones. So I can't promise that you're going to have huge quantities in advance. But if you say, hey, I'm willing to do that, or I want to try some of that, and give us some leadway, we'll make sure we've got some product available for you.
I don't know why you wouldn't want to do it all the time, every time you turn it on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that's one of my biggest fears. I guess the whole thing is creating a problem that isn't there.
Yep, for sure.
Now,
And-
people that do this, though, do they ever have to go through and clean their system out? They're constantly using an acid-based fertilizer? Probably depends on your water.
It does. It's really going to depend on your water quality and then how many, like for some people, right, everybody's got a little bit different strategy on fertigation. We have some people that's like, hey, I put on one dose of fertigation, maybe tassel time. And we have other folks that run 90% of their fertigation, or 90% of their N through fertigation. And so that's going to kind of play into that as well. I would say if you're going to be on the lower end of that and you have ugly water, there's still a likelihood that you're going to have to do some cleaning. But yeah, it'll kind of delay that a little bit. It'll kind of give you a little bit more of a on-ramp with how often you have to clean.
So what's the source of your acids you're using? Are you using food grade acid? Or are you using industry set reclaimed acid? What are you using?
Yep. So most of these acids, let's see. So like the nitrogen side of things, where we get the nitrogen from, it's melted urea. So that's how we're getting that in, and then we're combining that with sulfuric acid. I don't know the answer on if it's food grade or not. I can find that out though.
The virgin acid or recycled acid. Is it a green or is it a clear? That's are you testing for heavy metals? What are we putting in, especially if we're going concentration in drip system?
Yep.
That's becoming more of an issue, more of a conversation at this point. So
Yes, I don't think it's recycled, but I will confirm that. So great question.
you got salt index labels on for all low salt, or you not, or what are you on those?
There's essentially almost no salt in this. So, But yeah, and yeah, we can provide as technical of information as anyone would desire.
So basically, if you do the rapid soil test, it might tell you which one of these would maybe work the best.
Yeah, so it's not going to necessarily make a product rec for you, but yeah, through sitting down and saying, hey, all right, I have an antagonism of phos, let's say. Okay, we can run phos out there. You can run a product. Actually, there's one this one that's listed on the top here, this 219.42. We can do that. You know, my question is, like, if we're already gonna run fertigation, why would we only run phos, right? Like, why would we not spike that with some nitrogen instead of putting heavier doses of nitrogen on? Let's spoon feed that out, let's break that out so we can be more efficient. So yeah, I mean, obviously if you're, you know, doing it on beans, maybe, okay, that maybe makes more sense, but, you know, on corn, obviously, I think we want some nitrogen in. Yep, it'll be a good precursor. It'll create that initial roadmap for us as far as how we want to address that. Very good. So now, you know, that kind of takes us through that kind of that first pillar of SAP and then nutrient planning. And then we have to talk about, okay, well, what happens once we move into the season? Anybody doing any in-season testing, like tissue testing or any other types of in-season, going out in the field, okay? So tissue testing, so, you know, here at NutraDrip, you know, we use tissue for a lot of years. In my career before NutraDrip, did a ton of tissue testing on a whole variety of crops. And I'm not here to throw tissue under the bus. I'm not here to say tissue's bad, that you shouldn't use tissue anymore, things like that. I think SAP provides just some different information, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So, over here on the right side, this kind of gives you how tissue sample is done. So tissue sampling is an ash analysis, right? So when we take tissue samples, right, we take our leaf material, we send it into the lab. The first thing they do is they dry that material down. And then they grind it, so they have a very uniform particle size, and then they read that, and they say, okay, here's an ash-based reading that gives you your nutrient accumulation. And one of the challenges, though, I'd say one of the weakest spots with tissue is it doesn't account for volatilization of nitrogen. Because, you know, when we send in tissue, right, we just go grab them, we shove them in a paper bag or a Ziploc, not even a Ziploc, well, that's a paper bag, send them into the lab. Well, we have nitrogen volatilizing during that time cycle. So it's going to miss that. On the SAP side of things, they're using a liquid extraction. We'll talk a little bit more about that here. It's perishable, it's time sensitive. So in tissue, again, it's fairly convenient. We can go sample. We can kind of keep it in the office for a couple days until we ship it if we want to. It's not always best practice, but we can. With SAP, when we go out to SAP sample, we encourage you guys to have cool storage with them. It doesn't have to be ice cold, but hey, if you have a cooler, you know, that you're starting to meet and you say, hey, I've got a place that I can keep the samples out of the sun. Maybe I throw an ice pack in there, keep them cool. That's kind of step one. And then step two is we have to get them to the lab fairly quickly. We have to keep them cool. So even if you can't get them that day, if we refrigerate the samples for a day or two, that's okay. But then we actually have to ship them on ice to the lab. All right, so that sounds like a major pain in the fanny, right? Like that's just a whole bunch of hoops to jump through. I totally get that. One of the things we're doing to try to make that easier for growers in this geography is we're going to be shipping here out of our location on Mondays and Wednesdays. So if you say, hey, I'm going to participate, I'm willing to do some in-season SAP analysis, you can coordinate with our team, whether you're pulling the samples or if you would like to employ some of our services to pull some samples. And as long as we can get those samples in by our ship time on Monday or Wednesday, we're going to be golden. And then we'll ship that off to the lab, and obviously it'll be a little more economical shipping 2 or 3 boxes instead of 18 people shipping small boxes. Kind of talk about that. So what is SAP? So SAP is a measure of nutrients not incorporated into plant tissue because they're pulling that liquid from the xylem and phloem pathways. I guess it just says right there, the nutrients taken up through those. It also measures nutrient mobility, trace elements, metabolic indicators such as sugars and bricks, chemical parameters, pH and EC of that liquid extraction, and then total nitrogen breakdown. So, to put that like in kind of layman's terms, which is kind of how I understand things, I'm not a scientist by any means. Like, when we go to the doctor, which clearly I don't do very often, but when we go to the doctor, they try to give us advice based on data they collect, right? An analogy I like to use with this is tissue sampling would be similar to me going to the doctor and me saying, you know, doc, I don't feel good. I'm not really sure what's going on. And the doctor says, all right, I'm going to check it out. I'm going to take a hair follicle. right? Well, if they take a hair follicle, that's going to measure everything that's kind of happened up to that point, right? It's going to be a certain kind of analysis. Where with SAP, the doctor would say, let's take a blood sample, right? And that's kind of the same difference between tissue and SAP. So, nutrient movement is a huge thing, and this is something that SAP puts a lot of emphasis on. So when we collect SAP samples, early on in the season, that prior to V5, prior to V6, we take a whole plant sample, right? But once we get past that, we're going to start to segregate old tissue and new tissue, because we want to not only see nutrient accumulation and concentration, but we want to see the mobility of those nutrients from the lower portion of the plant to the upper portion of the plant. And so, of course, we know our pathways here with xylem and phloem. Xylem kind of being that on-ramp, that uptake into the plant, and phloem being that superhighway that goes both ways. So, I should have actually done a pop quiz here, but here's a list of immobile nutrients in the plant, right? So, we've got calcium, manganese, boron, iron, copper, zinc, moly, cobalt, and nickel. So, what that means is those nutrients don't go up the xylem. They don't sit here and say, hey, the plant is pulling me this way as I build, and I'm just taking concentration from here to here, right? It's an accumulation perspective versus a transportation effect. And then our mobile nutrients, which are going to move up and down very rapidly at times, especially as we get into those high ET situations that we talked about with the thermal imagery, right? As water is moving up and down that plant, those mobile nutrients are going to go with it. So nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, magnesium, chloride, and sulfur are going to be on the mobile side. Oh, this turned out really, really fuzzy. I apologize. I'm not sure why. So in the SAP analysis, this is kind of one of the outputs of what we look at. I'm going to start in the middle, maybe this, hopefully this is a little easier to see. But this would be, so you've got chloride, phosphorus, and sulfur. So are we on the anion side or the cation side?
Yeah.
Yep, very good. So chloride, phosphorus, and sulfur. So what we see here in this graph is we've got new leaf material versus old leaf material. So on chloride and phosphorus, we're higher. On sulfur, we're lower. And then over here, that's an optimum level of where we should be from a nutrient concentration perspective based on the growth stage of this crop, the yield goal of the crop, the fertilizer that's been applied, and then obviously the reading that's been pulled. So like in this particular case, we're deficient, right? We're deficient on all three of these nutrients. If we go to the cation side, again, really hard to read, I apologize, but you've got calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. You can see on some of this old leaf material, hey, we're sitting good, but on all the new leaf material, we're a little deficient. And so one of the things that's just critical about this, and one of the things I love about SAP, is it gives us that ability, that very rapid ability in season to say, I need to make an adjustment to what I'm doing, right? When we start at the beginning of the season, we have a budget, we have a goal, and that's great. Sometimes the environment gets in the way of that, right? Sometimes, based on what the environment is presenting us, it creates challenges to reaching our goals. And so this gives us that ability in season to really dial in how it is we can maximize our profitability. Lowest hanging fruit that we saw in 2025, again, hard to read here, but was sulfur, right? That is the lowest hanging fruit. That is the number one thing that we focused on addressing. It's also the number one thing from an ROI perspective, from a nutrient, from a return on investment. Adding sulfur in made a huge impact. Why is that? Any guesses as to why that is?
Less in the rain.
Sorry, what's that?
Less in the rain.
There's less in the rain. Yeah. Why would adding sulfur make such a big impact on our ROI? John, you're not allowed to answer. What's that?
Creates a nutrient flow.
Creates nutrient flow for sure. Sulfur's kind of like, anybody have that crazy uncle, right? When they walk into the holidays, You know, crazy Uncle John's gonna be there, and you never know, is he gonna come in spitting off about politics? Or is he gonna come in with gifts for all the kids? You just really don't know how the party's gonna go until John gets there. That's kind of like sulfur. Sulfur's kind of the carrier, kind of determines the mood, if you will. When we're deficient on sulfur, we're gonna be deficient on most of our microbes. That's how it shows up from a testing perspective. So one thing that I've made this mistake in the past, like when I was tissue sampling, it's not picking on tissue, it's just I didn't know any better. Like when I was tissue, you know, we would see this glut of deficiency on micros, and it'd be like, hey, all right, let's throw some ZMB, you know, combinations at some of these things. And all of a sudden we wouldn't move the needle as much as what we thought we would. And I think one of the reasons is because we were overlooking sulfur. We were overlooking that ability of the plant to kind of be in a little bit better mood, having that nutrient transfer going on. Sulfur, if sulfur is not right, your plant is not going to be happy. It's just that simple.
Can you have too much sulfur?
Well, sure, absolutely, right? I mean, I can have too much chicken, obviously, right? So we can always have too much. I would say that economically, you're going to be challenged to get there in most cases, right? If we start to put too much on, what will happen is we'll start to leach, we'll start to move it off source by overloading. The other thing that we do, though, what we see, you know, is a lot of cases we'll go out and pull a standard soil test and we go, hey, look, we're pretty good from a sulfur perspective, but is it plant available? Right? That's where the big challenge comes in, is this sulfate sulfur available to get into the plant and do what it's supposed to do? So I don't know that we can, I mean, technically, yes, we can have too much, but a lot of times when we apply, it's are we actually getting it into the plant?
I think we've had a double whammy the last 10 years. We've had, obviously with acid rain, less sulfur, but the yields are going up.
Yep.
We've got a double demand for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
So does putting all the sulfur onto the irrigation, does that get it in there in time?
Maybe. Depends on what form, depends on how much, but yes, utilizing sulfur through fertigation is a tremendous strategy, absolutely. So,
But I'd have to, my opinion is I'd have it with every single time you put nitrogen on, you should have sulfur in the mix with it.
I would agree with you, Ryan. I think in Nebraska that's a tremendous strategy. Yep, I agree 100%. Yeah. One other thing that SAP does with new, specific to New Age labs, and one thing I really love is when we start looking at nitrogen, and we're gonna spend some time on nitrogen here today, but it's gonna give us multiple forms of nitrogen. So we're gonna get ammonium nitrogen, we're gonna get nitrate nitrogen, total nitrogen, and then it's gonna put us into a conversion factor as well, which means how well are we going from nitrate form and ammonium form into amino acid form, right? So earlier, and I referenced this a couple times, we talked about you have to get nutrients into the plants, right? We can purchase all this mineral nutrition, we can apply it in a variety of ways, but if we don't get it into the plant, it doesn't matter, right? That's important, and as farmers, you are all well aware of this. We have spent a lot of time and energy and different products and different strategies of trying to do the best we can of getting nutrition into the plants. I would say kind of this next endeavor that we're really talking about is not only getting it into the plants, but now that we're into the plant, are we actually efficient with those nutrients? Are we allowing it to do the functions it's supposed to do? Are we converting it to the building blocks of that plant that we need to maximize yield? What we've seen is with nitrogen, we are not. By and large, we are not. And a lot of that comes back to application timing, application rate, application form, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that here on the nitrogen side, but we want to try to balance these cations and anions. Again, it kind of goes back to that same concept that we did with rapid soil, right? We talked about big antagonisms, we talked about things being out of balance. It's the same thing with SAP. If we don't have, I mean, every nutrient we're measuring is an essential element, right, to the growth. And if we don't have it, we're going to be out of balance and we're not going to be as productive as what we can be. So nitrogen in the plant sap is it assimilating properly? So again, we kind of talked about this. We get ammonium, we get nitrate, we get total N, and then a conversion factor. So we see high number of ammonium, a high number of nitrate in this sample. Of course, the nitrate's in the old, and the ammonium's in the new. What does that tell us? Why would we have nitrate in the old and ammonium in the new?
It's being converted.
It's being converted, that's right. You know, we're going through this process right here, nitrate into ammonium, right? When we think about this process, this is the process that we have to go through when we apply nitrate, or we apply ammonium, which most of it's coming in nitrate form, right, via UAN. This is the process we have to go through to get that nitrogen into the actual form that's useful for the plant. So that's a big process, and it's a very energy intense process, especially when we apply big glugs, big doses of nitrate at one time, right? Which is the way a lot of us farm, right? We say, hey, we're going to do nitrogen in 2 shots. Maybe I do some in a strip till or up front, or have a bunch in 2x2, and then I come out and side dress. Yeah, maybe I give 20 pounds of fertilizer, but I'm putting on these huge doses. So let's kind of go back to the doctor, right? Again, I don't go very often, not nearly as often as my wife wants me to. I guess I'll guarantee that. But when I go to the doctor, if the doctor said, all right, Nathan, I need you to consume 1 cup of salt this year to maintain a perfectly healthy, balanced diet, because we're going to get you to lose weight. We're going to get you to operate at peak performance, right? Okay, great. So what would happen if I said, all right, doctor wants me to consume 1 cup of salt for the entire year. I'm going to go home, I'm going to fill a gallon jug of water, I'm going to dump that salt in there, 1 cup, and I'm going to drink that water all today. Would that be a good strategy? That'd be a horrible strategy, right? Okay, well what if I said, you know what, I'm going to dump a half a cup in today, and in a few weeks I'm going to dump the other half a cup in. But I'm going to drink all of it each day. Still not a great strategy. Does that kind of sound like how we put nitrogen on though sometimes? Maybe a lot of times? It's kind of the same thing. We're kind of doing the same thing. And so, as we do that, we burn energy, we make inefficient. That's very common, right? Like, that's the process a lot of our corn's going to utilize as we apply nitrate, right? That's very, very common. Here's the kicker, and here's the thing we don't think about with it though. About 16% of the plant's total photosynthetic energy is used just for this conversion process. Okay? Well, what does that mean? Why does that matter? I'm using photosynthetic energy to convert nitrate down to ammonium. What am I burning up when I do that? What's fueling photosynthesis? What nutrient in the plant? Phosphorus, right? And we already talked earlier about we're challenged to get phosphorus into the plant. Our irrigation water is making that more difficult, and now you're telling me that UAN is putting even further stress on the use of that phosphorus in plant? It absolutely is. We are burning through our phos trying to convert nitrate into ammonium. I've seen some studies that even suggest fairly significantly higher numbers than this. And again, it kind of just depends on rate and timing. So I would suggest that if you say, hey, I'm going out with these huge glugs of UAN, I think there's some tremendous opportunity to get much, much better on your farm. Even with the same amount of units, just how can we put them on a different timing? Can we spread that out more? Can we use that much more effectively to get a better output? Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions on that? All right. So once we're into ammonium form, then ammonium assimilation looks like this. We go through the GO-GAT cycle, okay? And this is where carbon and sugars get really, really important, right? So if we're short on a food source as we go through this GO-GAT pathway, we're going to be extremely inefficient. So how many people were putting carbons on 10 years ago? Anybody? Okay. How many people are putting carbons on today? carbon or sugar source today. A number of us, right? It's become very popular, and this is exactly why, right? This right here is why, because we have to be efficient. We can't, like, you guys all know this. I'm just preaching to the choir. Like, we cannot be inefficient as farmers, right? Our livelihoods depend on it. We have to be as efficient as possible. I think gone are the days of saying, well, we'll just put more nitrogen on, right? Nitrogen's a cheap insurance. It is not. It is harming us when we over-apply nitrogen and when we put it on too much at one time. It's absolutely harming us. So, again, we kind of go through this ammonium assimilation process into glutamine, glutamate, amino acids, and then finally into protein form. So what is critical for nitrogen assimilation beyond just having nitrogen? Of course, you have to have that to assimilate it. But what else is important? Well, we talk about carbohydrates / sugars, sulfur, moly, copper, iron, and phosphate. So this is why one area where SAP becomes critical, right? One of the ways practically that I like to think about SAP is, let's say we do some side dressing, or maybe we use nitrogen as a carrier in a herbicide application and whatnot. Let's go grab a SAP sample at V3, maybe, okay? Right ahead of when we're going to apply that next dose of nitrogen, and let's make sure we have these things in balance, because these are the cofactors that are going to help make this process as efficient as possible in the plant. So if we don't have these, this process is going to be super, super inefficient. Does anybody want to grow inefficient crops? No? Okay. So I would suggest, again, let's grab a SAP sample 10-ish days or so prior to your first in-season nitrogen application. Let's make sure we have these in balance. That way we can convert that nitrogen, we can reduce how much phosphorus we're going to burn during that time. We can get that converted into amino acids as quick as possible and keep that plant headed sky high, keep that trajectory as high as we possibly can. We want a very efficient, lean running machine. Then what I would suggest is after we do our nitrogen application, let's come back. Let's say we go put nitrogen on V5, and let's come back at V7, and let's grab another SAP sample. How did we do? What's our score tell us? From an ammonium perspective, a nitrate perspective, a nitrogen conversion perspective, those things we talked about back here. How did we do? How did we score out? This is how I think this is one of the ways in how you get better on your farm, is we continually look at that number. How are we doing this? Can we do it a little bit differently? Can we continue to sharpen how we're doing this to find that next incremental gain on our farm in terms of profitability? And then, of course, you can kind of repeat that process throughout the season. When it comes to SAP, I like to see at a minimum 4 samples throughout the year. If you do kind of that pre and post nitrogen application, and then maybe we go out around V14 and then come back around R2-ish as well, kind of get that scorecard. So you can do SAP. SAP applies to any acre you farm. Rapid soil applies to any acre you farm. It doesn't have to be through drip. And you don't have to say, oh, well, I'm going to use acid-based formula, fertilizer if I do this. Or you can do this and say, how am I doing on my farm right now? Given my current farmer standard practice, I want to know how efficient am I being with my nutrients. And if you decide in the season, okay, I want to pull the trigger on some things and change some things, that's great. And if you say, I don't want to, I want to farm exactly how my plan is, but I'd like to get some data to understand how efficiently am I farming, this is a great tool to do that. Does anybody have this goal for 2026? Let me actually rephrase this, because nobody likes to raise their hands in the meeting. Does anybody not have this goal in 2026? Does anybody not want to grow high-yielding crops? Nobody raise their hand on that. So if we grow high-yielding crops, one of the things we have to consider is the nutrient requirement to grow high-yielding crops. Okay? So, sorry, it's kind of very high up there, but let's talk about 100 bushel soybeans. That'd be kind of a nice number to hit, right? That'd be fun, fun, fun. It is fun when you see triple digits coming in on soybean yields. So let's go through kind of a growth stage process and talk about the nutrient demand by kind of growth stage or kind of cluster of growth stages of what does this crop need? Well, when we start early on, the crop is going to use about 1 to 2 pounds of nitrogen per day, about a quarter point of phos, a tenth of a point, or sorry, a half to a pound of potassium, and a little bit of sulfur there. As we then get into a rapid vegetative state, all the way up to reproduction, you can see our nutrient consumption per day ramps up, right, as we would expect. You see nitrogen go up to about 4 to 6 pounds, phosphorus doubles, potassium goes 2 to 3x, and sulfur comes up quite a bit from 0.05 up to 0.2 or 0.3 pounds. So that's as we're building, right? We're building that infrastructure for our soybeans. As we churn, right? As we go into the reproductive stage, this is super critical, right? Once you start to do this, if you're missing, you don't recover from this. So it's very, very critical that we have the nutrients available to do this. So when we're in this R1 to R5 stage, we're going to be using 7 to 9 pounds of nitrogen a day that soybean is going to demand. We're going to be using 1 to 1.3 pounds of phos, 4 to 6 pounds of potassium, and about a half a pound of sulfur per day. Now, again, this is total nutrient consumption. This is not what we have to apply, right? Because obviously, you all know nitrogen. We don't typically apply nitrogen to soybeans in most cases, right? We let the soybean do the work of that through nodulation. But if you don't have good nodulation, as you all know, you're not going to be able to produce that, which means you won't be able to produce that. But one of the things, and it's kind of noted here on the bottom, is sulfur and potassium. Those are two of the things that you need to pay very, very close attention to as you get close to that reproductive stage. You know, are you set up for success there? Those are two of the key nutrients that are going to drive the retention of pods and then the size of bean in those pods. If you are deficient on potassium, you will have flat beans. The more, if you struggle with that, if you see some beans that really start to get really narrow, that is a potassium deficiency symptom. And then as we fill out here, uptake slows, redistribution starts to dominate. And you can see we go down here as far as what our nutrient uptake demand is. I'll leave this up here for a minute if anybody wants to take a picture. Otherwise, I can send this out to folks afterwards. That's what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? Any questions around that, kind of that nutrient uptake, that nutrient demand of high-yielding soybeans?
So you have anybody like drip on the soybeans, put say a mixture of nitrogen and sulfur, and like midway through, like maybe R3.
I don't know that. Do we have anybody doing that, Kurt?
We have, yeah, we've definitely tried it and gotten, I would say, mixed response.
Now what about just putting sulfur strictly through it? Style.
Tried that as well. I would say we've struggled to get consistent response to late season soybean.
So one of the things, you know, where my tiny little brain goes is I think about, you know, we talk a lot about late season soybean management, right? Late season starts at R1. That's kind of like late season soybean management. When you start thinking about high yielding, this doesn't say this nutrient uptake starts at R3, where a lot of times that's where we start to talk about R2, R3. We start talking about late season soybean management. We actually start before that. So if you don't have the pantry ready to go as you flip into reproductive stage, you are going to struggle. There are going to be, you have taken top end potential off. So that's something I would be mindful of, you know, as we get to that point, right? Is do we have a stock pantry? Because if not, you can't feed the whole team. So total nutrient uptake for 100 bushel soybeans, this is for the whole plant. We need about 500 pounds of nitrogen, 80 pounds of phos, 230 pounds of potassium, and about 18 pounds of sulfur. Look at that though. We need about half a pound a day of sulfur, which lines up with peak nitrogen fixation. If we are not giving our soybeans sulfur, we are going to struggle. It's as simple as that. So, this is a theme you're going to see on corn as well. But K demand is huge. You know, it is massive, and it doesn't really, like, you know, when we look at grain removal rates, we don't see these massive removal of K. So sometimes we don't always think about that, but that demand for K is massive. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, I have to put this huge dose of K out there. It's what do you have available in the soil, and what are you getting from your soil, and then we have to complement that if we're not getting enough. So so kind of what happens, this is why late season sulfur deficiencies show up very suddenly, right? We're not there, we're not meeting that peak demand, and then boom, it rears its head. As I kind of mentioned, K shortages cause flat pods, and then nodulation stress during flower cost yield very, very quickly. So as we think about nodulation stress during during flowering, what would be some things that would create nodulation stress?
pH in the soil for one.
Mhm.
Not having enough sulfur. Not having enough sulfur.
Not having enough sulfur, absolutely. Yeah, and then think about like just your soil structure as a whole, right? I mean, we need oxygen down there, right? We want to have good soil health. So we can talk about a lot of soil health principles, but that's going to put stress on nodulation as well, not having good soil health. So let's talk about corn. I'm going to go a little bit reverse order on this. So let's talk about growing what it takes to grow 300 bushel of corn. From a total nutrient uptake perspective, we're sitting at about 450-ish pounds of nitrogen. Again, that's not necessarily applied nitrogen, it's total, what you're pulling from the soil plus application. About 170-ish pounds of phos, around 400 pounds of potassium, and 35 or 40 pounds of sulfur. Now, what makes 300 bushel corn difficult or tricky is, again, it's these peak demand cycles that we get on. So nitrogen demand can exceed a half a pound per hour during peak growth. So you think about, like, if there's how many hours a day are we in peak demand during that life, during that time cycle? Like, also we got a huge nitrogen demand during very specific growth stages of that crop. K demand again is massive. Sulfur is a absolute yield limiter. Like we've known this for a while. We continue to see more evidence of this. We've got some very interesting data that the Calibrator Agronomy team, the team that we work with, has seen across about 9,000 data sets. The correlation of sulfur to yield in corn is extremely high. So yeah, and so your roots, they have to intercept nutrients very, very fast, right? They've got to be able to do that quickly, efficiently, get those nutrients into the plant. So placement matters immensely, which of course is one of the reasons we advocate very well for drip. We want to put those nutrients right where that interception can happen very, very quickly. So from a pounds per day uptake, so first in that VE to V4 stage, that very early vegetative, again, not a whole lot of nutrients needed on a per acre or pounds per acre per day perspective there, but you can kind of see the recipe there. And then as we get into rapid vegetative growth here, V5 to V10, the ear size and yield potential being set, we can see we were able to ramp up fairly significantly, about 5 to 7 pounds of nitrogen, a little over a pound of phos, and about 5-ish pounds or so of potash and a half a pound of sulfur. And then we kind of get that peak demand window. Okay, so V10 through R2. That's kind of that huge demand for our nutrients in this corn. So you start to look at this on a per pound per acre day, we need 10 to 12 pounds of nitrogen, 2 pounds of phos, 8 to 10 pounds of potassium, and about a pound of sulfur. So again, if we miss here, if we don't have the pantry and that supply line feeding it, we're stepping backwards. Go ahead, Bryce.
I would argue just on the 70% deal.
Okay.
I actually believe, because I think a lot's changed in the last 10 years. And this is why I think what you're talking about, like feeding minor amounts, not just too big, amounts at the same time. I would actually say I think it's 50 to 60% up to tassel, and I think corn wants stuff late, especially the new hybrids. You need to have nitrogen, you need to have sulfur, you need to have it in the top 8 inches into August, maybe early September. And so I just think it's keeping it right where it needs it. I know this is kind of going off topic just a little bit, but that's what I just kind of noticed a little bit. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a good and fair observation. I would say these points here, again, V10 through R2, that's just kind of the data that SAP has shown us at this point. It does, I don't disagree that there's still tremendous value post R2. That, hey, we've got to have that pantry still fully supplied at that point from a demand perspective, or we can still go backwards in a hurry at that point. Absolutely. But yeah, again, if you miss here, there's no making it back up. You don't get to go to R3 and R4 and say, hey, now we're going to feed it and overcome. And so then grain fill, uptake that's slow, but there's still a good demand for the crop going on. So again, I can leave that there for a quick second if anybody wants to snap a picture. But overall, kind of the point of this is to show that, if we want to grow high-yielding crops, we have to feed appropriately, and we have to do it at the right times, right? When we stress our crop with, again, big nitrate glugs, we don't have it on at the right time, we're expecting, hey, we put it on here, and we're expecting it to be available and around here, and how much pee did we burn in that process, and things like that. We start to take some gambles, I feel like. We start to take some risks that are going to really potentially come back and bite us from an efficiency perspective and an output perspective on our crop. So on a peak nutrient update per day, 300 bushel corn will need, again, kind of just summarizing what we talked about in that peak growth one, but that's every single day that it's going to need that. So if we want to crank out high yielding corn, we've got to supply it. All right, so we've talked chemistry for a while, right? And chemistry certainly is an important part of the equation to growing crops and being successful and maximizing profitability. Let's start talking about biology, and specifically kind of biology as a mode of action. And I even think of chemistry as a mode of action, right? A lot of times, when we think about modes of action, we kind of talk about herbicides and/or fungicides, insecticides, we talk about modes of action there. But I like to think about mineral nutrition, I like to think about biology as modes of action of how we can do things within that plant as well. So let's think about deploying our competitive exclusion principle, right? So our disease triangle, right? We know this host, environment, pathogen. Well, what happens if we can eliminate our host, change our environment, and/or outcompete our pathogen? That's how we alter. It's one of the ways that biology, as a mode of action, can alter that disease triangle, can significantly suppress the opportunity for that disease to come on. And again, we've talked about chemical a lot to this point. Now we're going to start talking about biological here for a little bit. I'm not going to get really too much into the physical side of things today. So a product that we sourced from our friends at Calibrated Agronomy is a product called BioAggie. Okay? As you all are aware, because you all get to live and breathe this, you get annoying salespeople like me pulling down your driveway, trying to sell you stuff, right? And you get hundreds of them a year, and it seems like over the last 5 years, everybody that pulls down your driveway has their favorite biology they want to sell you, right? And to some degree, it's a little bit of a wild, wild west with biology in that we can get it from about anybody, anywhere, anytime, right? And biology has taken on this whole big arena, if you will, of what's the right method, what's the right theory with biology. So I want to maybe explain a little bit of kind of how our approach to biology is. So with bioAG, well, I guess let me back up. When y'all were in grade school, anybody ever play Red Rover? Right? What was the key to winning that game? How did you win that game?
Break the line.
Say that again?
Break the line.
Yeah, and then, so we break the line, and what happens when we break the line? All right, they join our team. So part of the key to winning Red Rover is say, I want to have the biggest, the strongest, and the most, right? I want to outcompete the other team. That's kind of our approach to biology, right? There's a lot of products and theories out there that will focus in a very, very narrow sense. They might focus on phosphorus uptake or, pick your thing. And I'm not trying to pick on a specific product or anything like that, but just they get very, very narrowly focused. And sometimes when we implement those on our farm, sometimes we get good results, and sometimes we don't really see much of a result, right? And that's kind of like, well, why? Why is that happening, right? I think part of the reason that happens is maybe when we go to place that biological, we don't maybe always know enough about our environment. What's the biology that's currently in our soil? And does this match up? Does this complement what we're doing? Is it going to outcompete it? Is it going to add to it? Or is it going to just kind of be negated because maybe we're already good in this narrow little lens? So what bioAG does is rather than say, we're going to take a very, very specific kind of rifle focus to this, it says, we are going to try to overwhelm with good biology and take a very all-encompassing approach. That way, there's lots of different modes of action there, if you will, that we can encompass through the product. So, again, a little bit of a breakdown here in terms of what this product is compiled of. From a hormone perspective, you see very, very, very high on the cytokinin and auxin production. And there's also some gibberellic principles to that. And then stress adaptation. So, one thing that's just fun about this is talking with Clint. Clint Freeze, he's with Calibrated Agronomy. He's the guy who developed this product. Is the journey that he's been on with this product and other biologicals is kind of a fun journey to hear and talk about and learn about. In that, again, because of this very, very broad approach, he's got a lot of confidence in what this product can help you overcome on your farm. And that's why we see the consistency with this product. We feel like we see a much greater consistency from an ROI with this product than maybe a lot of other biologicals out there because of this big, broad, all-encompassing approach. So bioAG, how do you use it? Where do you apply it? You apply it in stressful environments. That's one area that immediately comes to mind. So if I have stress, can I use biology to help overcome that stress? You apply it in areas. You can apply it in areas where you say, you know what, I want to start converting or changing maybe what the future of my farm looks like. Maybe we're in a system where we're very heavily reliant on fungicides, right? And that's probably coming off of last year. That's probably kind of a sore subject for a lot of folks, right? With a nice little rust pandemic we had last year. But what if all of a sudden we said we want to start to outcompete those diseases with biology? There's opportunity there. So those are a couple of things that kind of jump to my mind when I think about the use of bioAG. So one time another product we have, again, I don't like to get super product focused. I just kind of want to show everybody a little bit above kind of some of the things that are in the toolbox here. So this product is called Backbone. Backbone is a very diverse carbon source, and basically it's going to feed soil biology and supercharge your soil. And so kind of where it does its thing is right here. Okay, so as we think about this process, okay, we think about this reduction from ammonium form with Backbone, this is what we're affecting right here. That's the big step in that process that we're going to change, we're going to alter, we're going to make significantly better. by providing that carbon source. So, it says up here, boost nutrient efficiency and rethink disease management with biology. So, those two products, BioAD and Backbone, a very common combination for us. What happens when we use those products in conjunction, using those products versus check strips and treat versus untreated type of things. So you can see here kind of early season, that early season SAP analysis. V4, you can see these nice increases on the nutrient density of those plants. And then you can look at tassel time and you can still see that through. BioAD and Backbone, again, this is kind of a season-long perspective of what are the advantages there from a nutrient density perspective in your plant. So, we just think about nutrient density, right? The more dense our nutrients are, the more efficient we've been, the tighter our factory is, we've wasted less, we're going to produce more. And now let's talk about how does this affect diseases. So, give you a little bit of the context of the study. So about 1,000 acres long-term use with BioAD versus 1,000 acres without BioAD use on them. So this is about a 10-year study that's been done. 60 individual zones on each data set, and the disease was calculated over all zones. So this is a big long list of diseases. So if you say, hey, we've got a common disease that we fight on our farm, there's a good chance that it might be on this list. But what's crazy is, when you look at the trait versus the untreat, we can go down the list of everything that's listed on here. In every single case, BioAD reduced the disease load on the crop. And again, that comes from that broad spectrum approach of biology, not this very narrow band. Because BioAD operates in that very, very broad spectrum. We're going to try to encompass as many things as we can and overwhelm with good biology. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. So, I'm going to shut up, much to everybody's delight here probably, and because I think I'm standing between us and lunch probably as well. But I just want to say thanks for the questions, thanks for listening in, and certainly thank you for the trust that you all place in our team. It means a lot to us. It gives us the opportunity to continue to learn, continue to operate, and we're extremely grateful for that. My contact information's up there. I get through this area fairly frequently. I also do work with a lot of growers, like connecting on Teams calls. So earlier when we talked about rapid soil analysis and SAP analysis, I would love to tell you that, hey, I'll be at your farm every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks sitting down with you in person doing that. Frankly, I don't have the bandwidth to do that just from a geography of what we cover. But what I will promise you is that when we get sample results back, within 72 hours, we will sit down together on a Teams call, digesting those results. That way you can fully understand them. We don't send results out and just say, here you go. Hopefully you remember everything I talked about and you can figure this all out. We're going to sit down with you. We're going to help explore and understand those sample results. So, with that, that's all I got. If there's any other questions, comments, feedback, happy to field those.